are individual tragedies. We went to a hospital where a doctor had been killed a few hours earlier. He was on his first shift. He never actually got a chance to properly treat a patient. His first day at work, having finished an internship, and he was killed when a mortar landed in an operating theatre.
President Zelensky has accused Russia of committing a war crime by bombing a blood transfusion centre in northeastern Ukraine. It's not yet known how many people have been killed. Moscow's so far not publicly commented on the reported attack. Jerome Starky is Defence Editor at The Sun, who joins us from Ukraine this morning. First of all then, about this blood transfusion centre, the attack that has happened, and what President Zelensky has said about it.
Well, President Zelensky, as you said, has condemned it. I mean, he said it was an guided aerial bomb, so some sort of an airstrike, a sophisticated Russian guided munition that appears to have deliberately hit this blood transfusion center. Now, the area where it happened in Kupiansk, in Kharkiv region, is the sort of northeastern front of the war at the moment, and it's where the Russians have been making some gains. They've been focusing their offensive fury in that area to try and distract the Ukrainians, obviously, who've been launching their counteroffensive predominantly in the east and the sort of south-central Zaporizhia region.
Whereabout are you, Jerome, at the moment? What are you witnessing, and what are you sort of focusing on?
Well, I've just come, I'm in Zaporizhia at the moment. We spent a few days down in Kherson, which you remember is the city that was captured by the Russians on the first day of the war. Then they retreated from it in November when Ukraine effectively made it impossible for Russia to supply its forces on the right bank of the Dnieper River. So it's a city that's changed hands twice. What's interesting is that it's now on the front line. It's the only regional capital that's really in range of sort of small Russian artillery like mortars, because it's so close to the front line, and having been spared the sort of devastating street-to-street battles that we've seen in, that have ruined places like Bakhmut and Mariupol, where there was intense urban warfare. Kherson was spared that because on the two occasions it changed hands, there was no actual really heavy fighting in the city. But now that the Russians have left, they're bombarding it with artillery and mortars on a daily basis, and people are being killed almost every day. It's easy to sort of lose sight of the fact that every single strike, often, these are individual tragedies. We went to a hospital where a doctor had been killed a few hours earlier. He was on his first shift. He never actually got a chance to properly treat a patient. His first day at work, having finished an internship, and he was killed when a mortar landed in an operating theatre. He was killed by shrapnel, and a nurse standing next to him severely wounded. So in Kherson, what we saw really is the fact that even though that isn't necessarily the focus of Ukraine's counteroffensive at the moment, even though it isn't necessarily the focus of Russia's effort in the war, it is nonetheless another sort of deadly battlefield where people are paying a price with limbs and lives.
Yeah. We are sort of 2 months into this counteroffensive at this point, Jerome, and there is now a feeling that time is of the essence because we will soon head for another winter, of course, the onset of winter. In sort of grand scheme of things, where are we at here? Because some analysis suggests that actually not much has changed in the last 2 months since the counteroffensive began, in the broad picture.
Well, I think the time pressure is coming from Ukraine's allies rather than from inside Ukraine. And, the greatest strategic risk to Ukraine is the resolve and the patience of its supporters, and none more so than America. And clearly, the longer this war goes on, the more opportunity there is for a change of heart in America and potentially an isolationist president to come into power who may see the war here differently and may want to reduce support. So that is what is driving time pressure. Ukrainians feel that pressure, and they have expressed their sort of frustration at it, especially given, on the one hand, there is pressure to succeed and advance quickly, and on the other hand, they would say that there has been there have been unnecessary delays from their point of view in delivering the weapons which they think are key for their success. And notably, they still haven't received Western fighter jets, F-16s, which were top of their list for a long, long time. I mean, specifically to your question on what's changed on the battlefield, Ukraine has advanced, they have gained ground, but they haven't gained as much or as quickly as they would have liked, and that's because they are attacking very well dug-in Russian positions. The Russians, effectively since last autumn, in much of the front lines, they deliberately made a decision to go onto the defensive. So, as they retreated from Kherson in the south and all the way up through Zaporizhia and then east into the Donbass, they've been preparing these defensive positions for a long time with trenches and minefields, and those defenses have been doing their job. They've been slowing down Ukraine's assault. They've been making it incredibly difficult and deadly for Ukraine to advance. What we've seen in the last week, or the last couple of weeks, I should say, is a focus by Ukraine to hit Russian logistics, and that has been the strikes in the Black Sea. So, of course, in the course of the war, there have now been 2 attacks on the Kerch Bridge, which links occupied Crimea to mainland Russia, both of which disabled the bridge for some time, making it more difficult for Russia to get supplies and material onto Crimea. In the last couple of days, we've seen 2 consecutive strikes by Ukrainian naval drones, semi-submersible, effectively guided torpedoes, which have exploded, one next to a Russian warship and one next to a civilian oil tanker, which was ferrying fuel to Russian forces. Both of these are not only symbolic, because, of course, the sort of audacity and the reach of these attacks is a shot in the arm for Ukraine's supporters and Ukraine's forces, but also it has an effect, and that effect is making it harder and harder for Russia to supply its troops. And that has been going on the whole time during this war, the sort of war on logistics, because ultimately, battles can be won, wars can be won and lost on logistics. And so as Ukraine faces stiff and determined resistance in the sort of close quarters combat on the battlefield, they are continuing to do what they know has worked in the past over the last 18 months, which is to choke Russian supply lines. And it was that choking of supply lines last autumn which was absolutely key to securing the Russian retreat from Kherson. And if they can continue to do it now, then they may find it becomes easier to break through, to find the weak point in the wall that may allow them to make significant advances with their counteroffensive.